The Chicago World's Fair of 1893, also known as the Columbian Exposition, was named to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovery of the New World. The fair opened its gates on the 1st of May, 1893. 27 million people attended the fair during its 6-month duration. Attendants from all over the world experienced a collaboration of the most renowned cultures the world had to offer. They experienced perfected forms of architecture and crowd control, which directly inspired Walt Disney when he created Disneyland. The music at the fair included a diverse selection spanning from African tribal to the most prestigious opera from the Western world. The attendants were exposed for the first time to religious heroines courtesy of the Women's Building Library. The Lower Arts Building brought a new perspective as well.
The architecture of the Chicago World's Fair was arguably the most significant architectural landmark in history. The fair built by Burnham would prove American dominance in the architectural industry. Burnham was the first architect to build a skyscraper, the Masonry Building, which at the time was the tallest building in the world. Burnham put together a team of architects from all over the country to design each of the 200 buildings in the fair's vicinity. Each architect would be paid $10,000 for helping. That's $300,000 in today's currency. There was only one female architect who would be paid $1,000, which is $100,000 in today's currency. This created controversy among the people of Chicago. They only wanted local architects to show that the city of Chicago would be able to rebuild their city from the ashes of the Great Chicago Fire. At this time, Paris had dominated the architecture industry with the Paris Exposition and the Eiffel Tower. Burnham said the fair created competition for Paris, and in the end, Chicago would prove to be successful. People would travel from all over the country to witness the beauty of the designs. The city's main structure, the Ferris wheel, would be the design to declare victory for Chicago over Paris. The magic of the city inspired thousands of other people to pursue an architectural career. Even though the fair has been demolished, it lives on in the way it changed America.
The music at the World Chicago Fair introduced to the masses several styles and genres of music. Thomas Theodore, the director of music, planned several events designed to spread American music throughout the world. At the previous World's Fair in Paris, the United States had been branded culturally inferior based on its music and art. At this year's Chicago World Fair, Theodore planned to progress American music to an esteemed level. To this end, he established several women's and children's choirs. The idea behind these groups was simple. Women and children had very innocent and calming voices. This led to groups such as the 1200-voice Children's Choir, which exemplified innocence and youth. They also began selling copies of the poems and songs that children would perform. The hope behind this was that participants would buy the books and poems, bring them home to their families, and give them to their children. If children grew up singing these poems and songs, they would have an aspect of American culture in their life. This would not only give them a respect for American culture, but would also give a new market to singers and songwriters from America.
Among many products introduced at the World's Fair were some that eventually became parts of American history and significant symbols of American culture that still exist today. Among these products were some like Cracker Jacks, which has since evolved and become such a significant part of what many Americans consider to be its favorite pastime, that they've included Cracker Jacks in the lyrics of a song sung almost every day during the American baseball season. Other products like Juicy Fruit Gum, Pabst Beer, commemorative coins, and souvenir postcards also made their debut at the fair, and they continue to be a mainstay of American culture.
The Women's Building Library was designed by women for women. This building had a huge complement of religious books that did something unique. What was unique, you might ask? They showed women as heroines who, using religion, expanded themselves outside of the domestic sphere or women's sphere. The domestic sphere was women's obsession and having in control of the home. that was where women's place were. But these books did something greater than that. They focused on women as leaders, as heroes, and they expended themselves outside of the women's sphere, and they were heroes in their own right. And the reason so many of these books existed, despite this contrary notion of domesticity, was because religion allowed a place for women to expand. Remember, this is 1893, and women's suffrage has been going on for decades at this point. Started around the same time as the abolishment movement, except for they still haven't gotten the right to vote. So having women outside of their place and their role is extremely important. And the reason the Women's Building Library focused on this was it was trying to attract the female population to the Columbian Exposition. And this was great because the Columbian Exposition had a massive turnout. And a nice chunk of that was women, because they actually wanted to show that there was female culture and female literature. Before the Women's Building Library was established, all other fairs had failed to properly represent a women's culture or the literary achievements. The Women's Building Library was built around the very concept that all their literary accomplishments should be combined in one place. There's over 24 countries of literature gathered around and placed in the library for people to see.
There was also a more controversial aspect at the Columbian Exposition. At this time in history, many Westerners viewed foreigners as racially inferior. In fact, there was an entire study of evolution conducted on race, putting the European white man on the top of the chart. During the fair, there were many exhibits which displayed the so-called barbarians from underdeveloped nations throughout the world. Asian architecture was viewed as inferior and barbaric. African culture was seen as tribal and uneducated. This was unfortunately a common mentality of the time, which was later displayed in the colonization of Africa and several open-door policies in Asia. The Western culture was seen above the rest of the world, a racist mentality that led to disrespect and conflict throughout history.
On October 30th, the fair closed its gates. There had been a total of 27 million tickets sold, creating a large revenue for its creators. After the event was over, they began closing many of the attractions. George Ferris traveled the country with his monumental invention, until 13 years after the fair, it was moved to St. Louis, where it was dynamited into pieces. Out of more than 200 buildings, only 2 stood the test of time. The fair was a financial and cultural success, not only for its investors, but for the nation.